The Suzuki violin method is perhaps the most widely used instrumental music education method in the world, renowned for its focus on children and their ability to learn at an early age. Conceived at the height of the Great Worldwide Depression and developed during the hardships of World War II in Japan, the Suzuki method was the personal triumph of Shinichi Suzuki, a kind and humble man from Nagoya, Japan. More than a personal triumph, however, Suzuki's method is a triumphant celebration of the boundless learning capacity of young children. Shinichi Suzuki was born on October 17, 1898, in Nagoya, Japan. His father, Masakichi Suzuki, owned the biggest violin factory in the world. During the summers when he was a child, Shinichi worked in the factory with his brothers. At age 17, Suzuki first heard Schubert's Ave Maria on a gramophone his father bought. He was amazed that the violin, which he had often used in sword fights with his brothers, could play so beautifully. Suzuki brought a violin home from the factory the next day and tried to make the sweet sounds that Misha Elman had on Ave Maria. At age 22, Shinichi went to Berlin, Germany to study with Professor Karl Klingler. During his 8-year study in Berlin, Suzuki met the famous scientist and violin virtuoso Albert Einstein. Einstein once said, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I get most joy in life out of music." One day, while attending a home concert in Germany, Suzuki met Waltraud Prang. She sang in a Catholic church choir and played the piano. The two became instant friends. 6 years after they met, on February 28, 1928, Waltraud and Suzuki got married. A violinist played Ave Maria as they left the altar. Shinichi moved back to Japan with his new wife at about the onset of the Worldwide Depression, symbolized by the stock market crash of 1929 in the U.S. Thousands of people lost their jobs, money lost its value, and many people became very poor. Masakichi Suzuki lost a lot of money because people didn't have the money to spend on violins. At this time, people were very suspicious of foreigners, so Shinichi and Waltraud moved to Tokyo, where it would be easier for Waltraud because foreigners were more common in Tokyo. They were very poor, but Suzuki's father sent them money for their living expenses. In 1939, World War II began, and in 1941, Japan joined the war. Tokyo was the main target of many air raids, and it grew worse day by day. The violin factory had to be turned into a factory that made airplane parts. In order to supervise the lumber going into the factory, Suzuki had to move to Kiso, Fukushima. Waltraud could not go because the Germans in Japan were being evacuated to mountain resorts in Karuizawa and Hakone. Waltraud went to the fishing cottage they owned in Hakone by herself. Food was scarce and conditions were bad. In Kiso, Fukushima, times were even tougher. Shinichi's younger sister's husband had been killed in an air raid, so she and her 2 children came to live with Shinichi. Food was so scarce that at one time they gathered algae off the rocks by the river and boiled it for something to eat. Working at the Red Cross, Waltraud was the only source of money for the family. In 1945, after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan and Germany surrendered to the United States, and at last the war ended. Finally, Suzuki got to be with Waltraud again. After the war, Suzuki continued to develop his method and taught at a handful of different schools. He even wrote a few pieces of music for young children to learn, such as the Twinkle Variations, Perpetual Motion, and Etude. In 1949, there were 35 branches of violin classes all over Japan, and 1,500 children studying violin with the talent education method. And in March 1964, the first USA tour took place. With 10 students, Dr. Suzuki traveled to the U.S. and aroused the Suzuki impact in the music education circle all over the United States. In 1966, Suzuki also published his first book, Nurtured by Love, about the mother tongue method, which was now becoming known as the Suzuki method. The Suzuki method is based on how children learn their mother tongue. It is important because it recognizes that children can start learning an instrument at a very young age and excel at it. The Suzuki method proves that talent is no accident of birth. Talent is developed, and a child's talent depends on its environment. The average child learns 296 words by age 2, 886 words by age 3, 1,675 words by age 4, and 2,060 words by age 5. So Suzuki decided that because this requires such high ability, why not apply the ability to learning an instrument?
It used to be that musical study was considered to be you either had music ability or you didn't. If you came from a family of musicians, it was in the family, it was in your blood. I think what Suzuki showed was it was in your environment.
Suzuki's personality also helped shape the Suzuki method. He was a kind and forgiving person and wanted to make good musicians, but more importantly, he wanted to make a better world. He once said, "Teaching music is my main purpose. I want to make good citizens, noble human beings." If a child hears fine music from the day of his birth and learns to play it himself, he develops sensitivity, discipline, and endurance. He gets a beautiful heart. While kind and forgiving, Dr. Suzuki was also very demanding with his older students in order to teach them to be good teachers.
It was pretty rigorous, and he was exceedingly demanding. He always was pushing you to exceed what you thought your abilities were. An example would be that he asked me to play Mozart G Major Concerto, the first movement, next week, he said. So what that meant to me was I had to have the entire first movement with the fingerings and the bowings that he wanted completely memorized by the lesson. But I got it done, and then when I played it in the lesson, he looked up from his chair and said, one word. He said, "Cadenza." I hadn't even attempted to try and get the cadenza learned at the end of the movement. And so I had to say, well, next week. He said, okay. So that was the end of it.
The Suzuki method uses many techniques to start children earlier and teach them more effectively than the traditional violin methods. The Suzuki method fosters a very active learning environment, whereas traditional methods use a more passive environment. Positive parental involvement in the Suzuki method is essential.
Because the parents are so involved with their children at the very beginning, there's a bigger support system there. The whole family gets involved.
The parents create the environment that the child grows up in and provide the support and home teaching that the children need to succeed. The Suzuki method allows all children to play an instrument because all children are born with the potential, just as they are born with the potential to learn their mother tongue. All children grow. It depends on how they are raised. The Suzuki method is not just to make better students and better musicians, but also to make better parents. Suzuki's philosophy for talent education and everyday life is to create a beautiful heart, develop sensitivity in the child and parent, respect all life, know the joy of making music, remember that art is within every human heart and that every child can learn. Shinichi's triumph was the conception of the mother tongue method, and it spread throughout the world, even though, during World War II, he suffered separation, death in the family, near starvation and poverty. Today, the Suzuki method has become one of the most effective and popular music methods in the world. There are over 8,000 certified Suzuki teachers and nearly 250,000 Suzuki students. More than a method of teaching music, however, the Suzuki method demonstrates the great capacity of human beings when they strive for their goals, musical or otherwise. Dr. Suzuki has shown the world that children, and maybe even adults, are capable of much when they are nurtured by love.